Sometimes the delay actions and disappointments of tailors can make a client take a very drastic actions. But honestly, sometimes drastic actions are needed to reset these tailors' brains. Here is one story of a tailor who took his client for a ride for an entire 6 months. Mr. Okezi tapped his steering wheel gently, waiting for the light to turn green. It was a little past 5 p.m., and the setting sun cast a warm golden glow on the bustling streets of Abuja. His phone buzzed on the dashboard, and a familiar name flashed across the screen: Amara, his wife. "Hello, sweetheart," he greeted warmly. "Hello, my dear." Amara's voice came through, light and soothing. "Please, can you help me pick up 3 packs of detergent and 3 bars of soap on your way home? The ones at home are finished." "All right, no problem," he replied. "Anything else?" "No, that's all. Thank you." With a smile, he ended the call and made a mental note. The traffic lights switched to green, and he eased the car forward, scanning for a shop to make the purchase. A few blocks away, he spotted a small supermarket tucked into an unfamiliar street. He pulled over, parked his car, and stepped out. The air was filled with the hum of activity, vendors calling out their wares, children playing on the sidewalk, and the rhythmic clinking of tools from a nearby workshop. The supermarket was modest but well-stocked. He quickly found the detergent and soap, paid the cashier, and exited. As he walked back to his car, something caught his eye: a tailoring shop adjacent to the supermarket. On display were several mannequins, each dressed in meticulously sewn senator outfits. One particular outfit stood out to him: a black senator design with intricate yellow embroidery that curved elegantly round the neckline and cuffs. Its simplicity and sophistication intrigued him. He couldn't resist. He adjusted his glasses, took a closer look, and decided to step inside. The tailor, a young man with a warm smile and a measuring tape draped casually around his neck, looked up from his sewing machine. "Good evening, sir. Welcome," he said, rising to greet him. "Good evening," replied Okezi, returning the smile. "I noticed the black senator outfit with yellow designs on the mannequin outside. I like it a lot. Can you make one for me?" Tayo, the tailor, beamed with pride. "Yes, sir, I can make it. That's one of my favorite designs. It'll fit you perfectly." "Good," Okezi nodded. "How much will it cost?" Tayo scratched his head, mentally calculating. "For the sewing alone, it will be 9,000 naira. They haggled briefly, eventually settling on 8,000 naira. "All right," Okezi said. "What materials will you need?" "You'll need 4 yards of black material and 1 yard of yellow material for the embroidery. That should cost about 13,500 naira, depending on the quality," Tayo explained. Okezi frowned slightly, thinking about his busy schedule. "I don't think I'll have the time to go looking for the materials myself. Can you handle that for me?" "Of course, sir," Tayo replied confidently. "Good, let's do it this way," Okezi began. "The total for the materials and sewing should be around 22,000 naira. I'll send you 25,000 naira to cover everything, including any contingencies." Tayo's smile widened. "Thank you, sir. That works perfectly." They exchanged numbers, and Tayo grabbed a measuring tape. "Let me take your measurements." Okezi extended his arms as Tayo worked swiftly, calling out numbers under his breath. He rummaged through his workspace for his notebook to jot down the measurements, but couldn't find it. With a sheepish grin, he picked up a tiny piece of paper and scribbled the numbers. "Don't worry, sir. I'll keep this safe," Tayo assured him. Satisfied, Okezi said, "I'm not in a hurry. You can take your time. I'll expect it in about a month." "Noted, sir. Thank you for trusting me." As they finalized the details, Okezi initiated the transfer, sending the agreed 25,000 naira. Once the transaction was confirmed, he shook Tayo's hand firmly, shared his contact with him, and walked back to his car, carrying the detergent and soap Amar had requested. Driving home, he couldn't help but smile. What started as a routine errand had unexpectedly turned into something special, a new senator outfit he hadn't even planned for. The evening breeze accompanied him as he navigated through the familiar streets leading to his home. Little did he know, this chance encounter with Tayo would add an intriguing twist to the fabric of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The shop grew quiet as dusk settled over the busy street. Tayo stretched his legs, leaning back in his chair as the sound of his sewing machine faded into the stillness. He picked up his phone and opened YouTube, scrolling through a list of suggested videos. A tutorial on mastering unique embroidery patterns caught his attention, and he clicked on it eagerly. As the video played, his earlier encounter with Mr. Okizi lingered in the back of his mind. He glanced at the tiny piece of paper where he had scribbled down the measurements. His notebook, the usual keeper of his client's details, was still misplaced somewhere in his cluttered workstation. "I'll find the notebook later and transfer these measurements," Tayo muttered to himself, eyes still fixed on the screen. No rush. He doesn't need the cloth for a month anyway. The video ended, and another automatically started, pulling him deeper into the world of intricate embroidery designs. Time slipped away, and the cluttered shop seemed even more disorganized under the dim lighting. A message notification snapped him out of his trance. It was from his girlfriend, Ada. "Babe, I need some money for cream, soap, and a few new undies. Please help me out." Tayo sighed, staring at the balance in his account. The 25,000 naira from Mr. Okizi was sitting there untouched. "It's just 15,000 naira, bomb," he rationalized. "I can make it back before I need to buy the materials." Without hesitation, he transferred 15,000 naira to Ada. She replied almost instantly with a stream of heart emojis and a sweet, "Thank you, my love." Tayo smiled to himself, leaning back in his chair. "I'll handle the materials later," he thought. "Plenty of time to sort it out. 2 weeks from now, I'll have the money back and can buy what's needed, no stress." With that, he shut off the light above his sewing machine, leaving the tiny piece of paper with the measurements lying unnoticed on the edge of his table. What Tayo didn't realize was that his procrastination and misplaced confidence was quietly sowing the seeds of trouble. By the time 2 weeks had passed, the memory of his promise to Mr. Okizi would have faded, lost among the clutter of his growing list of unfinished tasks. Even more, 8 weeks later, the promise will be buried in an unmarked grave. 10 weeks had passed, and the memory of the senator-making contract was now lost on both Mr. Okizi and the tailor until one fateful evening. It was a quiet Saturday evening in the Okizi household. Amara sat on the sofa in their living room, her legs tucked beneath her as she flipped through pictures on her phone. Beside her, her husband, Mr. Okizi, leaned back, one arm draped casually over the armrest, sipping a glass of chilled zobo. "Darling," Amara began, her voice breaking the silence, "do you remember that Kioma and Amika's wedding is in 2 weeks?" "Ah, yes," he replied, sitting up a bit. "The one they've been planning for months now. I'm happy for them." "Me too," she said, smiling. "But have you thought about what we're going to wear? You know, it's not just any wedding. Kioma is my childhood friend, and we can't just show up looking ordinary." He chuckled. "You women and dressing up! Do we really need to plan our outfits 2 weeks ahead?" "Of course," Amara shot back playfully. "And it's not just about dressing up. They've sent out the color of the day: black, purple, or blue, all with a touch of yellow. We need to coordinate." The mention of yellow sparked a faint memory in Okizi's mind. He leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing. "Wait a minute," he said, setting his glass on the table. "Black and yellow. I feel like I've heard that combination recently." Amara tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Okizi's eyes widened slightly as it dawned on him. "Ah, I remember now. Almost 3 months ago, I met a tailor on my way home one evening. I asked him to make me a senator outfit black with some yellow embroidery. It would have been perfect for this wedding." Amara raised an eyebrow. 3 months ago, and you've heard nothing from him since then?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "No, I haven't. Honestly, I completely forgot about it. Work has been so hectic lately, and I haven't had the time to follow up." "Well, that's odd," Amara replied thoughtfully. "Why hasn't he called to let you know it's done or anything about it?" "That's what I'm wondering too," Okizi said, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "I'll contact him tomorrow and find out what's going on." Amara nodded. "You should. 3 months is a long time. I hope he hasn't forgotten, or worse, squandered the money you paid him. I'm sure in your usual way you must have paid him already." Okizi leaned back into the sofa, crossing his arms. "I hope not. He seemed like a trustworthy young man. But now that you mention it, it's odd that he hasn't reached out. Even if I've been too busy to remember, he should have followed up by now." Amara's expression softened. Let's not jump to conclusions. Just call him tomorrow and find out. If the cloth is ready, it'll save us the trouble of finding something else for you to wear. He nodded. You're right. Let me not assume the worst. I'll give him a call first thing in the morning. The conversation shifted to other topics, but the thought of the cloth lingered in Okazi's mind. As much as he trusted people, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something might have gone wrong. That night, as they prepared for bed, Amara reminded him one last time. Don't forget to call the tailor tomorrow, okay? I won't, he assured her, pulling the covers over himself. Let's see what he says. The hum of the sewing machine had paused for now as Tayo stood in front of a client, carefully wrapping his measuring tape around the man's chest. 42 inches, he mumbled to himself, jotting the number into his notebook. Just as he leaned down to take the next measurement, his phone buzzed insistently on the table. The ringtone echoed in the room, interrupting his concentration. Hold on, Tayo said to the client, straightening up and reaching for his phone. He glanced at the screen, which displayed an unsaved number, and frowned slightly before picking up. Hello, good afternoon, Tayo said, his voice polite but distracted. Good afternoon, came the voice on the other end. It was calm and courteous, yet carried a subtle undertone of expectation. This is Mr. Okazi. I wanted to check if my cloth is ready. The name hit Tayo like a distant echo in a large empty room. He froze momentarily, gripping the phone tighter. Mr. Okazi? Cloth? The words swirled in his mind, but they brought no clarity. Yes, sir, Tayo replied cautiously, his tone measured. Your cloth, sir. Unaware of Tayo's struggle, Okazi continued, his voice casual. It's been almost 3 months now, and I haven't heard from you. I just wanted to know how far you've gone with it. We agreed that it would be ready in a month. Tayo's heart sank. His mind raced, frantically trying to piece together the fragments of a memory he couldn't fully grasp. 3 months? A cloth agreement? What kind of cloth was it? The series of questions were tumbling in his mind. Yes, sir, I remember. Tayo lied smoothly, masking the panic that bubbled beneath his calm exterior. Your cloth is almost ready, just a few finishing touches left. That's good to hear, Okazi replied, sounding satisfied. It's a senator outfit, correct? Yes, exactly, Tayo stammered, quickly latching onto the clue. The senator cloth is coming along nicely. Okazi chuckled lightly. Good, I'll give you another week, but please ensure it's ready by then. I need it for a wedding. Absolutely, sir, it'll be ready, Tayo assured him, his voice steady despite the sweat forming on his brow. All right then, thank you, Okazi said, ending the call. Tayo lowered the phone and exhaled deeply, his mind reeling. He had no recollection of Okazi or the senator cloth. The name was faintly familiar, but everything else was a blank slate. He turned back to his client, forcing a weak smile. Let's finish up quickly. I need to attend to something urgent. The client raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Once Tayo completed the measurements and saw the client out, he rushed to his work table, grabbing his measuring notebook. He flipped through the pages frantically, scanning for any mention of Okazi with senator cloth and its design details linked to it. Nothing. Then he recollected a fragment of that fateful evening. He had written the details on a piece of paper. His pulse quickened as he rifled through piles of paper on his table, searching for the tiny piece of paper where he had scribbled down Okazi's measurements that day. His workspace, as usual, was a chaotic mess, scraps of fabric, old receipts, and loose threads everywhere. He dug through the mess, overturning items in frustration. The piece of paper was nowhere to be found. Tayo sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. How could I have been so careless, and he thought, guilt gnawing at his conscience. He vividly recalled promising himself to transfer the measurements to his notebook that same evening. Instead, he'd been distracted by YouTube videos and had kept postponing it, convinced there was ample time. Now the consequences of his procrastination had come crashing down. Not only had he forgotten Okazi's full measurements, but he also had no recollection of the specific details of their agreement. How much had Okazi paid him? Had he even bought the fabrics? Does he even remember the color design? What do I do now? Tayo thought helplessly. He couldn't call Okazi to ask for the details again without exposing his negligence. And yet, he couldn't deliver a finished outfit without the proper measurements or materials. He leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. The weight of his mistakes bore down on him like a heavy cloak, and he realized just how unprofessional he'd been. Sitting at his moderately styled office table, Mr. Okazi let out a deep sigh, his phone still in his hand. The conversation with Tayo replayed in his mind, and the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Tayo had not sewn the cloth. The tailor's hesitant tone, the confusing responses, and the lack of follow-up over the past 3 months all pointed to one conclusion: Tayo had forgotten about their agreement. Shaking his head, Okazi leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished surface of his desk. He was disappointed but not surprised. Life had taught him to always have a backup plan, and this was no different. 3 months, he muttered under his breath. Plenty of time to get it done, but he couldn't even remember me properly. Refusing to let the situation ruin his plans, he decided to act swiftly. He knew how important the wedding was to his wife Amara. Disappointing her or showing up at the event unprepared was not an option. When the clock struck 5:01 p.m., signaling the end of his workday, Okazi gathered his belongings and left the office. Instead of heading straight home, he drove to a nearby boutique he had visited a few times before. The boutique, a modest yet well-stocked store, had a variety of stylish outfits for men. After browsing for a few minutes, his eyes landed on a perfectly tailored outfit, a sleek black senator wear, adorned with subtle yellow embroidery. It was almost as if the cloth was waiting for him. "This will do," he said to himself, nodding in satisfaction. The shopkeeper smiled as Okazi handed over the payment, and within minutes he walked out of the store with a neatly packaged bag. A sense of relief washed over him as he got back into his car. Problem solved, he thought, driving home. The buzz of the phone on Tayo's cluttered work table was becoming a familiar sound. He glanced at the screen and saw the now familiar number of Mr. Okazi flashing for what felt like the 100th time. "Oh God, Mr. Okazi," he sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck as guilt prickled at his conscience. For weeks, Tayo had been dodging Okazi's calls. The first time Okazi had called after their initial conversation, Tayo had stared at his ringing phone, debating whether to answer, but fear had outweighed reason. He knew he had no answers, no cloth to show for the money he'd received, and no measurements to even begin. The ringing stopped. Tayo exhaled, but the reprieve was short-lived as the phone buzzed again. Without hesitation, he picked it up, waited for it to finish ringing, and then switched it off. It was a tactic he'd perfected over the last few months. Let it ring once or twice, then power down his phone to avoid the confrontation he wasn't ready to face. In the beginning, Okazi didn't suspect anything unusual. He assumed Tayo was simply busy or momentarily unavailable. Coupled with his own hectic schedule, Okazi found himself calling, occasionally twice, maybe 3 times a week. Each time, the result was the same. The call would ring unanswered before the line went dead, with no callback from Tayo. Life moved quickly for Okazi. Between office responsibilities, family commitments, and social events, he didn't have the luxury of dwelling on the missed calls. Yet every time he remembered the unfinished cloth, a pang of annoyance surfaced. "Maybe he's just overwhelmed with work," Okazi had reasoned to his wife one evening when she asked about the senator dress. "I'll keep trying him." But as the months dragged on, Tayo's unavailability became glaringly obvious. Then came the day when Okazi decided to press harder. It had been nearly 6 months since he had contracted Tayo for the cloth, and the realization hit him like a cold splash of water. 6 months? He muttered to himself. The sheer length of time stunned him, his busy schedule having obscured just how much time had passed. Determined to resolve the matter, he called Tayo 5 times in a single day. The first 2 calls followed the familiar pattern rings that went unanswered before the line went dead. But on the 3rd and 4th attempts, Okazi noticed something peculiar. The phone would ring twice, then cut off completely. By the 5th call, frustration and suspicion had fully taken hold. Okazi leaned back in his office chair, the phone still clutched in his hand. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. It finally dawned on him that Tayo wasn't just unavailable, he was deliberately avoiding him. The realization left a bitter taste in Okezi's mouth. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the mounting evidence was impossible to ignore. The long months of silence, the unanswered calls, and the lack of any updates or progress all pointed to one truth. Tayo had failed him and was now avoiding his calls too. Okezie sighed heavily, placing his phone on the desk and staring at it. "So this is how it is," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. While he hadn't been urgently waiting for the cloth, he had trusted Tayo to uphold his end of their agreement. He had given him ample time, even paying in advance. Yet here he was 6 months later, with nothing to show for it. Later that evening, as he sat with Amara in their living room, he shared his frustration. "You mean he hasn't picked your calls in all this time?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Not once," Okezie replied, his tone calm but edged with disappointment. "At first I thought it was just bad timing, but now it's clear he's avoiding me. I should have realized earlier." Amara shook her head, a mixture of sympathy, empathy, and annoyance in her expression. "Some people don't take their work seriously. It's disappointing." "It is," Okezie admitted, "but I'll deal with it. One way or another, I'll teach him a bit of a lesson." "I've been more than patient with that Tayo," he said, his brows furrowed in frustration. "It's not even about the cloth anymore. It's the way he's been ignoring my calls after taking my money. It's insulting." Amara nodded in agreement. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable. He's showing no regard for you as his customer. Imagine ignoring calls for months after being paid in full. That's beyond irresponsible." Her words fueled Okezie's resolve. "You're right. Tomorrow I'll deal with this matter once and for all. If he thinks he can treat people this way and get away with it, he has another thing coming." Amara looked at him, her expression softening with concern. "Just don't let your anger get the better of you. Handle it calmly, but firmly." Okezie nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll handle it all right." The next morning, Okezie, determined to put an end to the lingering issue, grabbed his car keys and drove to the unfamiliar area where Tayo's shop was located. As he pulled up to the small shop, he spotted Tayo inside, hunched over a sewing machine, working on fabric for another customer. Okezie's anger flared at the sight. "So he can work diligently for others, but can't honor our agreement?" he thought to himself. He stepped out of his car, squared his shoulders, and walked into the shop. Tayo looked up, distracted by the incoming footsteps. The moment he saw Okezie, his face fell. Recognition dawned on him, bringing with it a wave of panic. "Good morning, sir," Tayo greeted hesitantly, his voice low. Okezie didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, he crossed his arms and fixed Tayo with a steely gaze. "Tayo, do you remember me?" Tayo fidgeted, his eyes darting nervously. Yes, sir, I do." "Good," Okezie said, his tone sharp. "Do you also remember the cloth I paid you 25,000 naira to sew for me nearly 6 months ago? And the calls I've been making to you that you've consistently ignored?" Tayo's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I've been meaning to call you back, sir," he stammered. "I've just been busy." "Stop lying," Okezie interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "You've had 6 months, Tayo, 6 months, and instead of doing what I paid you for, you've been dodging my calls and wasting my time. Is this how you treat your customers?" Tayo opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. The truth was, he had no excuse. He still didn't remember the exact specifications of the cloth Okezie had requested, and the measurements were long gone. As the silence stretched, Okezie's patience wore thin. Without another word, he walked over to the sewing machine Tayo had been using, unhooked it from the table, and lifted it into his arms. Tayo's eyes widened in shock. "Sir, what are you doing?" he exclaimed, rushing forward. "I'm taking this," Okezie said coldly. "When you decide to either deliver my cloth or return my money, you'll get your machine back." Tayo's protest grew louder as he followed Okezie to the door, but the older man was resolute. A few neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to gather outside the shop. "Please, sir, don't do this," Tayo pleaded, his voice shaking. I promise I'll sort it out. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged woman with a scarf tied around her head, stepped forward. Oga, please, calm down, she said, addressing Okazi. Let's talk this over. Don't take his machine, it's his livelihood. Okazi turned to face her, his expression hardened. Do you know what this young man has done? He took my money in full, ignored my calls for months, and didn't even bother to make the cloth I paid for. Is that how a business person should behave? The woman hesitated, glancing at Tayo, whose face was flushed with shame. Another man in the crowd spoke up. Tayo, is this true? Tayo's gaze dropped to the ground, his silence confirming the accusation. Okazi's voice rose, firm and unwavering. I'm not here to ruin his business, but he needs to learn that actions have consequences. I'll return this machine when he either delivers my cloth or refunds my money. Until then, it's mine. Without waiting for further argument, Okazi dropped the sewing machine into the back seat of his car, slammed it shut, and got into the driver's seat. As he drove away, the crowd dispersed, leaving Tayo standing in front of his shop, staring after the departing vehicle, completely helpless and a victim of his own foolishness. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on Tayo. Losing his sewing machine, a tool central to his livelihood, had thrown him into a state of despair. Worse still was the scorn of his neighbors, who didn't hesitate to voice their disapproval. Tayo, how could you allow something like this to happen? One elderly woman had said, shaking her head. A customer gave you money in good faith, and you treated him like that? Shameful. Another man chimed in. You're lucky he only took your sewing machine and not something more serious. People have gone to court over less. Tayo had no response. He felt their words cutting into him like knives. The reality of his actions hit him harder than ever. If he didn't find a way to resolve this issue, he would not only lose his sewing machine but also his reputation. Sitting in the now empty shop, Tayo mulled over his options. He had no idea where Mr. Okazi lived, and with no mutual acquaintances to help him, there was only one course of action left. He would have to call him directly. That Saturday evening, Tayo mustered the courage to dial the number he had avoided for months. As the phone rang, he braced himself for the conversation ahead. When the call connected, a stern but familiar voice greeted him. Yes? Tayo's throat tightened. Good evening, sir. This is Tayo the tailor. I wanted to sincerely apologize for my behavior. I know I've wronged you, and I am deeply sorry for everything. Please forgive me. Before he could continue, Okazi interrupted him. I'm busy right now. Call me tomorrow evening. The line went dead before Tayo could say another word. He sighed heavily, realizing that earning Okazi's forgiveness wouldn't be easy. Sunday evening arrived, and Tayo was ready. He called Okazi again, his heart pounding as the phone rang. This time, however, the call went unanswered. He tried a second time, then a third, but still there was no response. In his home, Okazi sat on the couch, his phone buzzing on the table. Amara, seated beside him, noticed the screen lighting up. Tayo is calling again, she said, glancing at her husband. Okazi leaned back, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Let him call, he said calmly. Amara raised an eyebrow. Why aren't you picking up? You said you'd talk to him today. I will, Okazi replied, but not yet. Let him feel what it's like to be ignored. He avoided my calls for months without a second thought. It's time for him to taste his own medicine. Amara frowned slightly. Two wrongs don't make a right, you know. I'm not trying to wrong him, Okazi said. I just want him to understand how disrespectful and frustrating his behavior was. Maybe then he'll learn to treat his customers better. The phone buzzed again, but Okazi didn't move to pick it up. For the next 2 weeks, Tayo found himself on the receiving end of the same treatment he had once dished out. Every time he called, Okazi either let the phone ring unanswered or picked up briefly only to tell him he was busy. Tayo grew more desperate with each passing day. His shop remained inactive without his sewing machine, and his attempts to borrow equipment from friends had been met with skepticism. Why should we lend you our machines when you can't even handle your customers properly? One friend had said bluntly. Realizing he needed advice, Tayo turned to a group of older tailors he knew. One evening he sat with his formal boss and recounted the entire ordeal from taking Okazi's payment to losing his measurements and ignoring his calls. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then his boss spoke. Tayo, let me be honest with you, he began, his tone stern. You've handled this situation very poorly. How did you have the guts to keep a customer's cloth for almost a year, even after he paid you in full, and then you ignored his calls on top of that? What were you thinking? Your first mistake was not recording his measurements properly. Your second mistake was assuming he wouldn't notice. And your biggest mistake was avoiding him instead of owning up to your error. Tayo nodded, his face flushed with shame. I know I was wrong, he admitted. But what can I do now? Keep calling him, keep apologizing. Be persistent. And if he ever agrees to talk to you, make sure you come up with a concrete plan to either sew the cloth or refund his money. That night, Tayo lay awake, thinking about the mess he had created. He had always prided himself on his tailoring skills, but his poor business practices had overshadowed his talent. He resolved to keep reaching out to Okizi, no matter how long it took. He also made a silent promise to himself. If he ever regained his sewing machine, he would never let something like this happen again. It had been 1 month since Mr. Okizi had taken Tayo's sewing machine. Each day he passed by the corner of his house, where the sewing machine stood, his mind at peace, knowing that Tayo had learned a lesson. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, as Mr. Okizi sat at his desk at home, sipping a cup of tea, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It wasn't a number he recognized. Hesitating for a moment, he finally picked it up. Hello? Good afternoon, sir. A calm, measured voice responded. This is Mrs. Cynthia. I'm calling on behalf of my nephew, Tayo. I was hoping we could have a conversation about the matter concerning his sewing machine. Mr. Okizi sat up straighter in his chair. The last thing he expected was a call from someone on Tayo's behalf. He had half expected Tayo to show up himself, but here was a woman speaking in his place. Mrs. Cynthia? Mr. Okizi said, trying to place the voice. What exactly do you want to discuss? I've already made my decision about Tayo's behavior. I understand, sir, and I do not want to excuse what Tayo did, Mrs. Cynthia said, her voice firm yet gentle. I am not here to defend his actions. What he did was terrible, and I have made sure he understands that. However, I want to ask for your understanding in this matter. Mr. Okizi leaned back in his chair, intrigued. Go on. I know he has wronged you, sir, and I know he is in no position to make it right at this moment. But what you may not know is that Tayo has been without work for over a month now. Without his sewing machine, he has had no way of making a living, and frankly, he's been without enough to even feed himself. He's truly struggling. Mr. Okizi listened quietly, the woman's words sinking in. He wasn't unsympathetic to the struggles of others, but his frustration with Tayo had clouded his judgment for so long. Still, he wasn't going to be easily swayed. And what do you want me to do about it? He asked, his tone cool, but not unkind. I would like to propose a solution, Mrs. Cynthia continued. Tayo has agreed that he will pay back the full amount you gave him in 1,000 naira. However, as a penalty for the distress caused and the prolonged inconvenience, he will add an additional 5,000 naira. That's the amount we've agreed upon. There was a long pause on the other end. Mr. Okizi thought carefully about her words. Tayo had been ignoring his calls for months, and it wasn't just the money, it was the principle of the matter. But hearing about Tayo's hardship gave him pause. He could be merciless, or he could show some compassion. I see, he finally said. And what exactly do you expect from me? Mrs. Cynthia's voice was calm but earnest. I simply ask for your understanding. Tayo is a young man who has made a grave mistake, but he is trying to make it right. If you could release the sewing machine back to him, he will repay the amount as agreed. I promise you, he will honor his word. Mr. Okizi rubbed his chin, mulling over what she'd said. You're asking me to give the machine back to him, even after treating me with disrespect. Now that is not taking into account our contract that he failed to keep to even after full payment? Yes, sir, I understand your anger, and I do not ask for you to forget what he did. But I would like to ask that you consider his current situation. He knows he is in the wrong, and I have made him understand that. Mrs. Cynthia's words were gentle, but firm. It was clear she wasn't just asking for a favor, She was making a plea for mercy. The sincerity in her voice hit Mr. Okizi harder than he had anticipated. He thought about his own experiences, how people, when given a chance, could change for the better. Was it too much to offer Tayo that chance? "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Cynthia," he said, his voice softening. "I've been very angry about how Tayo handled this situation. Not just the money, but the complete disregard for my time and patience." There was silence for a moment before Mrs. Cynthia spoke again. "I appreciate your understanding, sir. I truly do. If you could find it in your heart to show some mercy, I believe it would make a world of difference to Tayo. He has learned his lesson the hard way." Mr. Okizi nodded to himself, thinking, "Okay, here's what you should know." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Mrs. Cynthia waited, her breath held in anticipation. "I've already decided to keep the sewing machine for 4 months, exactly how long Tayo ignored my calls. Even with him paying back the money, I was intended on stretching him that much. I have the resources to do that. But with that penalty you've mentioned, maybe we can work out something." Mrs. Cynthia let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Thank you, sir. I believe that is fair." "Good," Mr. Okizi said, "but I want to make one thing clear. I'm not doing this out of pity for him. He needs to learn that actions have consequences." "I understand completely, sir." "All right, then," Mr. Okizi said, the finality in his tone signaling the end of the conversation. "I'll be expecting him and perhaps the two of you to come by and collect his machine once he's met the terms." "I'll make sure he does." Mrs. Cynthia thanked him, and the call ended. Tayo, his heart pounding in his chest, stood nervously at the entrance of Mr. Okizi's residence. Beside him stood Mrs. Cynthia, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Tayo's anxious energy. She had been instrumental in persuading Mr. Okizi to consider giving Tayo another chance. And now they were about to face the man who had been both Tayo's judge and jury for the past several months. It had been a long, painful journey for Tayo, one filled with mistakes, regret, and lessons learned the hard way. Yet here he was, standing before the man he had wronged, trying to make things right. He had borrowed the 30,000 naira from his friends and family, convinced that this was his last chance to salvage his reputation and avoid losing everything. Mrs. Cynthia, sensing her nephew's unease, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just stay calm and apologize once more to him. Show Mr. Okizi that you've learned your lesson." Tayo nodded, though the nervous energy in his body didn't wane. They both walked to the courtyard where Mr. Okizi sat on a bench, calm but firm, enjoying the evening breeze. There was a moment of silence as Tayo and Mr. Okizi locked eyes. The tension between them was palpable, but Tayo could see a flicker of something, maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness in Mr. Okizi's gaze. "Good evening, sir," Tayo greeted, dropping his gaze down. Mr. Okizi simply nodded, then shifted his gaze to Cynthia. "Good evening, Mr. Okizi," Mrs. Cynthia greeted, her voice smooth and respectful. "Good evening, Mrs. Cynthia." Mr. Okizi's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight behind his words. "Please, you two take a seat." He gestured towards the empty bench adjacent to him. Leaving only Mrs. Cynthia to sit down, Tayo chose to remain standing. I'm sorry for everything, sir," Tayo began, his voice shaking slightly. "I know I've let you down and I want to make it right. I've come to pay you back the 25,000 naira, along with the additional 5,000 naira as a penalty for the distress I caused you." Mrs. Cynthia had already explained to Mr. Okizi that Tayo had managed to borrow the money, but the moment of truth had arrived. Tayo waited for Mr. Okizi's response, his heart in his throat. Mr. Okizi took a long look at Tayo still standing, his face unreadable. After a moment, Mr. Okizi sighed and shook his head. "Tayo," he began, his voice steady, "I appreciate that you've come here with the money, but I'm not interested in accepting it. You see, the money was never the issue for me. It wasn't about the 25,000 naira or the penalty. It was about trust, and you broke that trust." Tayo's heart sank, and he felt a lump form in his throat. But before he could speak, Mr. Okizi held up a hand. "However," he continued, "I've given it a lot of thought, and I've decided that I'm going to forgive you. I'm not going to take your money, Tayo. Instead, I'm giving you another chance." Tayo blinked. Unsure if he had heard correctly, Mrs. Cynthia, sitting up straight on the bench, looked just as surprised. "You're giving me another chance, sir?" Tayo asked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Yes," Mr. Okizi said, his expression softening. "But I'm not just going to let you off the hook entirely. You owe me a great deal more than money. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm giving you 20,000 naira. I have another sample that I'd want you to make for me, another senator dress. Hopefully you redeem yourself this time. I'm not going to give you an expectation time. I'll leave that for you to decide." Tayo's eyes widened. You mean you still want me to make a senator dress for you?" "Yes, I do," Mr. Okizi said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I like the quality and the neatness of the samples I saw that day in your shop. However, as much as they speak highly of your skill, you'll have to earn my trust, Tayo." Tayo was speechless. For a moment, he simply stared at Mr. Okizi, unable to believe what he was hearing. The anger and resentment were gone, replaced by a rush of gratitude and relief. He had expected to lose everything, his dignity, a customer, and possibly his business. But now, here he was, given another chance. "I don't know what to say, sir," Tayo finally managed, his voice choked with emotion. Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I won't let you down again. I'll make sure the dress is perfect, and I'll make sure to take my work seriously from now on." Mr. Okizi nodded, his expression more relaxed now. "Good, I'll hold you to that. I already have your contact. I'll forward you the design on WhatsApp." With a sigh of relief, Tayo nodded his acknowledgement. Then he stepped forward and produced an ever-present measuring tape from his back pocket. "Sir, let me get your measurements so I can get started on the dress." After taking Mr. Okizi's measurements, Mr. Okizi called on one of his house servants to bring Tayo's sewing machine. Tayo thanked Mr. Okizi profusely again before he and Mrs. Cynthia left, carrying the sewing machine and the loan money with him. Tayo couldn't stop smiling as they made their way back to his shop. 4 days later, Tayo stood nervously at Mr. Okizi's front door, holding the finished senator dress in his hands. He had worked day and night to ensure that the dress was perfect and delivered on time, and as he rang the doorbell, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Mr. Okizi answered the doorway with a smile, his eyes immediately drawn to the neatly packaged garment Tayo was holding. "You've got the dress?" Mr. Okizi asked. "Yes, sir. It's all ready," Tayo replied, his voice full of hope. Mr. Okizi took the package and carefully opened it, revealing the yellow with white embroidery senator dress inside. He ran his hands over the fabric, admiring the craftsmanship. There were no mistakes, no uneven stitching or loose threads. It was perfect. "You did a good job, Tayo," Mr. Okizi said, genuinely impressed. "This is exactly what I saw the first time in your shop. This was what I wanted." Tayo beamed with pride. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad you're happy with it." Mr. Okizi's eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and approval. "You hid your skills from me for almost a year, huh? I had to take your sewing machine away before you'd show me what you're capable of." They both laughed, the tension between them now completely dissolved. Tayo felt a weight lift off his shoulders, and for the first time in months, he felt completely free and a little comfortable around Mr. Okizi. "I'm sorry, sir," Tayo said, a bit sheepish. "I was foolish then." Mr. Okizi patted him on the back. "You've already shown me you can change. Keep this up, and you might just become my personal tailor. I'll also introduce you to some of my friends. You've got potential, Tayo." Tayo's heart swelled with gratitude. "I won't let you down, sir." As Mr. Okizi complimented him one last time, Amara, who had been watching the exchange from the side, smiled softly. She could see the transformation in both men. Tayo, now a man determined to build a better reputation in his tailoring work, and her husband, who had chosen to forgive and offer a second chance. And in that moment, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new friendship. With all the lessons abound in this story, remember at least one of them always. It's never late to fix a promising relationship. Also, persistence can get nearly through every closed door. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.